Good morning, kindness friends. Today we are going to be doing a science experiment, sink and float. So before you start, you need a glass bowl, you need a bowl to hold your objects, and you need to make place cards with the words sink and float. You need some type of measuring cup, and you want to put a black line where you want your water to go to. And you will need a baster of some kind or an eyedropper. Oh, and a towel to dry your objects. So before we start pouring the water, we put the place cards out. Sink and float. Then with two hands, you hold your measuring cup and you pour the water very carefully into the glass bowl. So our first object is a seashell. Let's see if it sinks or it floats. Okay, well, as you can see, it's touching the bottom, which means sink. So you take your towel, dry, and you put it under the sink category. Now let's try a cork topper. It's on top of the water, so that means float. Take it out, dry. Put it in the float category. Let's see what happens with this button. Touching the bottom, sink or float? Sink. Dry, under the sink category. Let's do this styrofoam ball or sphere. It's right on top. So float. Dry. Float. Okay, let's see what happens with this star ice cube. It's filled with water, so let's see what happens. The star is on top of the water. Float. Dry. Okay, we have a paper clip. Sink. Dry. Sink. Okay, let's see what happens with this clothespin. Well, it's kind of in the middle, so technically it's not completely touching the bottom, so it is floating, but not as much as some of the other objects. So, float. Let's see what happens with this bell. Sink. It's touching the bottom. Dry.